The year was 543. The plague had peaked in intensity and was now slowly fading out throughout the war-ridden Mediterranean basin. Justinian had recovered, bringing much-needed security to the political life in the court. The worst of the crisis had passed. Now stood the formidable challenge of securing the overstretched empire. The reign of Justinian entered its second phase. The priority was the Persian front. An army was assembled and entered Sassanid Armenia. This large force was ambushed and routed by a much smaller Persian army. In Africa, Roman provocation triggered a new rebellion. The Moorish War resumed. At Cilium, Solomon died on the battlefield and his army was routed. These events greatly destabilized the province. In Constantinople, Belisarius was reinstated and sent back to Italy with only a handful of troops and limited resources. Justinian, still looking for the solution to unite the church, published the Edict of the Three Chapters. The goal was to reach a compromise and find a common enemy by condemning 3 famous bishops who revolved around Nestorianism. But the Monophysites viewed Trinitarian Christianity as strictly different from their beliefs. Many Chalcedonians also rejected the edict because the last ecumenical council had accepted 2 of the implicated bishops. Shah Khosrow entered Mesopotamia and besieged Edessa. Much was invested into the operation, but the fortress held out. The attackers received some gold from the defenders and left. After that, the 2 monarchs agreed on a 5-year truce. It was guaranteed by a payment of 5,000 pounds of gold to Persia. The war was now restricted to Lazica. Another imperial army, outnumbered, was wiped out by the Berbers. Its commander shared the fate of Solomon. Despite their disunity, the tribal leaders now pillaged Roman Africa. In Italy, Belisarius was allowed some reinforcements, while Totila besieged Rome. The garrison resisted, but a famine began. The Romans attempted to relieve and resupply Rome by boats via the Tiber, but could not make it in time. The king entered and considered destroying the Eternal City. Thankfully for the Romans, Belisarius convinced him not to do so. Around this time, a Visigothic army invaded Roman territory, but the local troops repelled it. Further east, John Troglita was now the Magister Militum of Africa. Despite an early setback, he began to stabilize the situation. Since Totila had moved on to other Roman-controlled areas, Belisarius recaptured Rome. In Ravenna, the Church of San Vitale was consecrated by Bishop Maximian and decorated with magnificent Byzantine-style mosaics representing Justinian, Theodora, and their courtiers. The Pope arrived in Constantinople to discuss theology. Justinian wanted him to approve the 3 chapters edict, but faced the refusal of Vigilius. The Empress Theodora, who had protected and helped the Monophysite cause from inside the court, contracted an illness and died. Around this time, John the Cappadocian, a former rival of Theodora, reappeared in the court, but would never regain his former importance. After the Empress's passing, 2 Armenians named Artabanes and Arsaces initiated a plot against the emperor. The goal was to assassinate Justinian and put his talented cousin Germanus on the throne. But Germanus was not about to betray Justinian. The news rapidly reached the ears of the emperor, who ended the plot quickly. The Lazic king, confronted with the harsh realities of Sasanian occupation, turned back to the Romans and asked Justinian for help. A land force was rapidly assembled for this operation. John Troglita, exploiting the most disunity, finally broke their resistance in a decisive victory at the fields of Cato. The region was now pacified. Such clear successes were not obtained by Belisarius, who, after a 4-year indecisive campaign, once again left the Italian peninsula. A conflict sparked in Pannonia between Gepids and Lombards. Of the two sides, the Lombards obtained Justinian support and troops were sent in the area. The Romans attacked the strategic stronghold of Petra. The fortress was soon relieved by a large enemy force, which brought reinforcements and supplies. The Romans counterattacked and routed a smaller army. In response, the Sasanians entered Lazica in force yet again, but were defeated at the river Hippus. Meanwhile, Rome fell once again to Totila. Sicily was ransacked and Syracusa besieged. The Roman position appeared ever weaker. The emperor, however, finally found the resources to launch a large-scale expedition. He appointed Germanus for the task, who started gathering troops. At this occasion, and in order to divide loyalties among the Goths, he married Theodoric the Great's granddaughter, Matasuntha. His unexpected death, however, delayed the invasion. For the time being, a smaller expedition sailed to the endangered island of Sicily under Liberius, but could not achieve much. In the Balkans, the Slavs crossed the Danube. They forced their way through Thrace, inflicting significant damage before being defeated and repelled. This same year, the Kutrigors, motivated by the Gepids, invaded as well. The old general Bessas had been chosen as the new leader on the Lazic front. He besieged Petra, showing personal bravery in the battle. This time, the fortress fell. The Romans reasserted control over a large portion of Lazica. From now, the front calcified, with neither side being able to push the other out of its positions. On the 9th of July, Phoenicia suffered a massive earthquake, which in turn triggered a tsunami. Felt as far as Alexandria and Antioch, it caused enormous destruction and killed tens of thousands. The Goths were now projecting power against the empire, taking Corsica, Sardinia, and raiding the coasts of Greece. However, in a decisive naval battle not far from Ravenna, a Roman fleet destroyed the Gothic navy. Still forced to reside in Constantinople, Vigilius continued to oppose Justinian when the latter reaffirmed the 3 chapters in a new edict. Narses now replaced Germanus as commander of the expedition and marched inland towards Italy, having recruited Heruli and Lombard contingents. Meanwhile, a window of opportunity opened in Hispania. The Visigothic kingdom was in a state of civil war. A rebel named Athanagild demanded Justinian's assistance. Thus, as Artabanes arrived in Sicily to take command, Liberius sailed away with 2,000 men. At Staginae, facing Narses, Totila attempted a frontal assault and failed. The king fell along with thousands of his men. Months later, at Montelactarius, the last army the Goths could field was defeated. War was raging in Pannonia. A Roman army arrived, but had to detach a portion of its troops to suppress a religious strife. Still, the Lombards vanquished the Gepids at Asfeld. At some point, Justinian met 2 monks of the Nestorian faith, who claimed to have learned how silk was produced in the far eastern lands of China. Now, they told the emperor that they could attempt this same journey to bring back the precious silkworms. The Romans were especially fond of this product, and the opportunity to bypass the Persian monopoly on the Silk Road was too great to ignore. Thus, Justinian agreed and promised great recompense in return. The monks set out for the east. An ecumenical council was convened to settle the 3 chapters dispute. The bishops of the West were underrepresented, and not even Vigilius attended the debates. The council ended in a clear victory for Justinian's side. The Franks now intervened in Italy. A large army crossed the Alps. At one point, it split into two groups, one of which was ambushed after much plundering. This army fled towards the north in disarray, while a disease outbreak killed many in its ranks. The second army had to face the main Roman force and was crushed at Casilinum. Victory in Italy was attained, and Justinian decreed the so-called pragmatic sanction over the peninsula. The Praetorian prefecture of Italy was effectively recreated. In Arabia, war between Ghassanids and Lakhmids saw King Al-Mundir fall in battle. It was around this time that the two monks returned from the Far East. Having hidden the silkworms inside their hollow canes, their mission was a success. It allowed Eastern Rome to start producing its own silk in certain industrial centers around the empire. Constantinople had acquired a new economical asset. The cooperation with the rebels allowed the Romans to reconquer the southern part of Hispania. Athanagild, for his part, won the civil war and was crowned king of the Visigoths. Continuously under pressure, Vigilius finally conceded to Justinian's demands. He accepted the 3 chapters edict and was allowed to return in Italy, dying during the journey. In Palestina Prima, the Samaritans, joined by some Jews, rose in rebellion. They destroyed the churches and killed the local governor. Soon, another army arrived and swiftly crushed the revolt. Freed from the Italian front, the Romans intensified their efforts in Lazica. They broke the siege of Phasis, inflicting significant casualties to the Persian army. These setbacks, combined with new opportunities in the eastern part of his empire, convinced Khosrow to negotiate. A new truce was agreed, this time pacifying the entirety of the Romano-Persian frontier. In December 557, an earthquake of considerable intensity struck Constantinople. The city suffered heavy damage. The inhabitants were left shaken for some time, and a few months later, the dome of Hagia Sophia, which had been fragilized, collapsed. Natural disasters continued as a second wave of plague afflicted the capital. A new steppe people, the Avars, arrived in Europe. Justinian received their embassy in the capital. The relations with the Avars started well, and they began subjugating the Pontic steppe. The following year, the Kutrigors invaded. They split into 3 columns, the main thrust of which threatened Constantinople. Justinian called upon the retired Belisarius to repulse this invasion. This old general proved his worth once again. He gathered a small force and ambushed the enemy. Defeated, the Kutrigors retreated across the Danube. Justinian would not leave them in peace, and with typical Roman diplomacy, incited the Utigos to attack their neighbors. During this period, the Sangarius Bridge was completed. 430 meters long, this bridge was to ease the communications between the capital and the eastern provinces. After extended negotiations, a 50-year peace was concluded between the two states. The treaty included, as its main articles, an annual payment from the Romans, an agreement to not further fortify the frontier, the restriction of trade to some specific border cities, and finally, Persian evacuation of Lazica and the recognition of Roman dominion over the kingdom. The Avars completed their conquest of the Pontic tribes. A new embassy demanded lands in Moesia, but Justinian refused. Eventually, the last Gothic-controlled cities were captured. Italy was now reconquered after 2 decades of war. 2 decades which, however, devastated the peninsula. Around this time, there was a renewal of street violence in the capital, with shortages of food and water. The peace with Persia was expensive, and the government had to extract as much money as possible. Certain communities, such as merchants and bankers, were greatly affected by this. It served as a catalyzer for a plot which almost had the emperor murdered before it was discovered. Belisarius was accused of having taken part in the conspiracy, but Justinian rapidly freed him. The dome of Hagia Sophia, destroyed since the earthquake, was now restored. The building was once again inaugurated. Patriarch Eutychius led the ceremony. In his never-ending quest to bring non-Chalcedonians into the official faith, Justinian put forward the doctrine of aphthardotocetism, which stated that the body of Christ was incorruptible. Many considered this doctrine to be incompatible with Chalcedon, and thus were hostile to it, such as Patriarch Eutychius, who was swiftly deposed. The debate would not endure for long, however. Sometime later, on the 14th of November 565, at the advanced age of 83, and after 38 years of rule, Justinian passed away. Justinian and his 4 decades of reign truly defined an era. Under his rule, the empire went through both formidable triumphs and crippling setbacks. He left a great legacy in architecture and law. He worked hard for a solution to unite a divided faith. He was always on the lookout for diplomatic opportunities and launched grand military campaigns to restore the classical Roman Empire. The plague, however, struck a terrible blow, and Justinian only managed to pacify the frontiers at a great financial and human cost. After the growth of the early 6th century, the Romans had entered a period of strained resources. Despite this, a builder, a lawmaker, a theologian, a diplomat, and a conqueror, he was one of the few that deserved to be called the Great.